Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Economic Developers Council of Ontario, I am pleased to welcome you to today's Trade and Tariff virtual roundtable discussion. We're pleased to have so many participate in these sessions. This is our fourth now. And as we navigate the evolving landscape of global trade, tariffs, economic policies, discussions like these are crucial for sharing insights, fostering collaboration, and identifying strategies that drive growth and resilience for our province. And EDCO strives to be here to support all of you, our members, and to provide resources where we can and support any way we can. We thank you for your commitment in strengthening Ontario's economic development, and we want to make this roundtable discussion as engaging and productive experience for all of you. We are recording this session, so we do put the recording up on the website following, as well as a white paper with the discussions. And before we get started, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to Brock Dickinson for his participation, not only today, but in many of our other sessions. I'd also like to thank all of you for your commitment to economic development in Ontario, and your engagement and contributions are vital in shaping the way forward in this complex and ever-changing landscape. So thank you for taking time to be here today for the conversation. I look forward to how the discussions go, and now I'll pass it over to you, Brock.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And I think by sort of pointing out that I've done several of these, you're sort of warning people that they got to put up with me again. So apologies for shared messages that you may have heard from me before. I do want to take a couple minutes just off the top to kind of do some quick updates as we have done the last couple of times. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Always a test of the technology to see whether I've got this figured out the right way.
You can see your screen. And
there we go. I think we're on track now, right?
You are. You've got it perfect.
Excellent. So this is the fourth of these sessions that EDCO has done, the third that I've had a bit of a hand in, and as always, we're kind of looking at trade and tariffs and trying to kind of get a bit of a read on what's going on in terms of our own communities and the context that this is happening in. And as always, there's a sort of a central figure that kind of lies behind the discussions as we move into this. And so I did want to kind of reflect on what may have changed a little bit since we got together last 2 weeks ago. And at that time, we were just around the beginning of the month. It was just sort of we were starting to get a bit of a sense of what Liberation Day might mean. But part of what we've been through together over the last couple of months is just this kind of back and forth of tariffs and proposals and counter tariffs and retaliation. And we're going to do this and we're not going to do that. And I found this chart a couple of weeks ago. I think this has been really helpful in terms of trying to figure out what actually is going on at the moment. And this sort of takes us up to Liberation Day. So kind of catches us up to where we were 2 weeks ago when we sat down. But of course, 2 weeks is forever in this current reality, right? Like so much has happened in the last 2 weeks. So in addition to this kind of layer of back and forth discussions and tariffs and counter tariffs, we have had the imposition of tariffs on softwood lumber. That came after Liberation Day, but earlier this month. And then, of course, we've seen some increased clarity around what's going on with tariffs for others. And particularly in the Chinese context, we see these kind of massive tariffs starting to roll out. And as the Chinese and the Americans go back and forth on this, they seem to kind of ratchet up or elevate up a little more almost every day. And so it's still this sense that we haven't reached stability. We don't really know what's going on. We don't entirely know what's happening, but that there continues to be more and more kind of layered into the conversation. And this week on Tuesday morning, we saw CBC and the Globe and Mail both reporting that we should be preparing for tariffs on pharmaceuticals produced in Canada as well. And so, every time we kind of turn around, there's another piece of the puzzle, another another element of things that we need to kind of start to wrap our heads around. And part of that just creates levels of instability in our thinking and in the sort of the broader economy. I keep coming back to this notion. I shared this with you a couple of weeks ago. Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman has described what's going on as the chaos monkeys taking over the White House. And so we kind of get this repeated sense that just when we think we figured it all out, there's something else that comes down the pipeline to keep us on our toes. And I think that that's starting to play out in ways that are really confusing the market. So if we think, for example, of the tariffs that have been imposed on the Chinese, it means, for example, that a Chinese produced computer battery is subject now to a 125% tariff. Unless, of course, you put it into a Chinese computer, in which case it's then subject to just a 20% tariff. But if you were to put it into, say, a Vietnamese computer, then it's subject to no tariff at all, right? And so we've got the same product that is essentially being tariffed three different ways. And I think that this is kind of emblematic of what we're all struggling with. And the businesses in our communities are unsure of how to navigate in this context. And so even though the last couple of weeks may have seemed a little quieter, in terms of trade war talk and strange proclamations coming out of the White House, the actual implications of what's being done are starting to kind of resonate a little more clearly, and are ramping up the confusion on other levels. I do think as well that we're seeing a few other signs of what the longer term implications of this whole thing may be. So, again, in past discussions, we've talked a little bit about what's going on in the tourism space. And with many, many Canadians deciding to boycott travel to the United States and to refuse to take vacations there, we wondered if this might have some impact on the US tourism market. So back in February, we were able to see the beginnings of this, that cross-border traffic by car to the United States decreased by about 22, 23%. We now have the March numbers, and they suggest that cross-border traffic to the US is down by about 32%. So pretty significant, at least a one-third decrease in tourism activity going over to the US. And the estimated financial impact of that on the American tourism market is about $6.5 billion. So that's interesting from a couple of perspectives. And one is that obviously opens up a $6.5 billion opportunity for Canadian communities to kind of promote and boost tourism closer to home. But it also suggests that we're starting to see some of the real financial impacts on industries in the US as a result of the confusion over the tariffs and the response that people are having. So places like California have now rolled out very aggressive Come to California tourism marketing campaigns. I think they've slightly missed the point. The focus of a lot of the campaigns is, we love you, Canadians, come and visit us. Not really recognizing that we're not going because we don't like them, but we're going because we're in the middle of a trade war, or we're not going because we're in the middle of a trade war. And so, playing nice in marketing campaigns is not likely to change the general trend. But I do think that this process shows a bit of a ray of potential sunshine for us on the Canadian side of this trade conflict, because we are starting to see real financial and economic impacts in the US market. That a 6.5 billion dollar decrease in tourism spending by Canadians in the US will translate into about 42,000 jobs lost, and really substantial hits to the income of many communities in key states like Florida and California. And so there is this sense that, part of our hope for where things go. It's a terrible and a strange thing to say, but we're really hoping in some sense that portions of the US economy begin to crash as a result of some of this activity. If the US consumer, if US industries, if US business leaders begin to observe that this stuff is hurting America, then this may start to accelerate the pushback against the whole tariff regime and the tariff project that the Trump administration has put forward. And so I think that even though it's only been 6 or 8 weeks that we've been in the midst of this, we're starting to see some signs that that's taking place. And I think it's important for us to tell that story as well, that we are seeing those cracks in the facade of the U.S. economy, and the more that we can kind of connect those to the tariff situation, the more it creates pressure on our American colleagues and counterparts to confront the tariffs and to think more rationally about this whole situation. And we can see this stuff playing out in a lot of ways. This is a chart that shows the value of building permits for manufacturing facilities in the United States. So interesting. One of the things I've been sort of talking about with folks over the last couple of years is in that period from 2020 to 2024 that coincides with Joe Biden's term as president. You can see this massive ratcheting up. This is the effect of the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, as they chased manufacturing investment from around the world. But you can see since 2024, since the beginning of 2025, that the numbers are kind of stabilizing, right? That we've seen a flatness to this. And so there's been massive growth in the manufacturing sector over the last 4 years. The uncertainty over tariffs seems to have slammed the brakes on all of this. And so not only are we seeing impacts on the tourism side, but we're seeing it in terms of manufacturing investment in the States as well. And I think that's in direct contrast to what we're seeing here in Ontario. That yes, we've got some pretty big challenges, and we've got some companies that have announced some layoffs and some slowdowns. But we've also seen some pretty substantial announcements of new investment flowing into the province. And the interesting thing in my mind is that, in the face of American aggression around the tariffs, it's our other friends and allies that are sort of coming to the table and saying, hey, we need to think more carefully about how we position our investments. So the German company Siemens on the 1st of April announced a new $150 million R&D facility to be located in Oakville. The Taiwanese company, the Minth Group, announced on the 3rd of April a new $300 million automotive parts manufacturing facility to go to Windsor. And the Italian company Ferrero announced an expansion of its operations in Brantford on the 10th of April of $445 million, a great project there. So we can see that in the first 2 months of this, well, first 2 weeks of this month, the Italians, the Taiwanese, the Germans have all rallied around Canada, have rallied around Ontario, and leveraged nearly $1 billion in new investment into the province. And so I think that there are positive signs for us to kind of reflect on in the midst of the broader chaos and confusion. And I think if we look forward, we can start to see some indications of other things that are likely to emerge in the near future. So the parties have begun to release their policies. I'm not in the federal election. I'm not here to take sides on anybody's party, but here's a quick glimpse at one of the things that the Liberals have put into their policy around affordable housing. And they have proposed a $25 billion investment into prefabricated housing. And I think this sort of points in some interesting directions. One is that when we line that up with the tariffs on softwood lumber, I think we can see an emerging opportunity where we're likely to see an internal market, a Canadian market created for more softwood lumber products because we can't ship them to the States, and that part of that market will be driven by prefabricated and modular housing components. And so I see this big emerging opportunity to supply that market. And in the context of the tariff wars, where's that stuff likely to be made? Well, it's likely to be made right here at home. So we are likely to see major investment in the Canadian modular housing market. And if you think about $25 billion in access to larger supplies of softwood lumber, the kinds of products that we begin to, or projects that we begin to imagine take on all kinds of new shapes and forms. And this suggests a kind of an emerging opportunity. This is not just at the level of buildings themselves, but modular components for home building and for construction projects. And so I think there's some really interesting things on the horizon. The other thing that I see that's sort of emerging is the accelerated discussion of how we advance the removal of interprovincial trade barriers. So great to see yesterday the Premier and the Minister announcing a deal with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia with Premier Houston and Premier Holt. The only reason that Prince Edward Island wasn't at the press conference to join this yesterday was that it was busy passing the legislation in the House in their province. And so we can see some of this stuff beginning to build momentum and to gain traction moving forward. So I think that as chaotic as the situation remains, that there are now starting to be some positive signs out there and some things that I think we can take heart in as indications that we may not see the worst impacts of this trade war, that there are positive things that are mitigating or offsetting some of those negative impacts, and that although we're not out of the woods and there's certainly a long way to go before this thing is over, that there are some very positive signs there. As always, I'll just flag my YouTube channel real quick where I'm talking about these kinds of ideas on a regular basis. Today, we're taking a break from tariffs. I just posted a new video on AI and its implications for the workforce, but these are the kinds of things that I'm exploring on a regular basis, and that I'm really kind of hoping that over the course of the discussion today, that we can start to look into in a little more detail as well. So hopefully an update, a little bit of a reflection on where I think some things are going. But I'd be really interested in kind of hearing from folks here as to whether you're feeling a little better about some of these issues, or whether in your community the angst is rising and the challenges are continuing to be seen as something that's going to be pretty threatening. So happy to hear some feedback or some ideas or some reactions from specific communities. I warned folks last week. I see Belinda is here. I warned folks last week that if we don't get lots of people stepping up, I will volunteer people for input and ideas as well. So Belinda, thank you for saving one of your colleagues. What are you seeing in your community? Oh, you're muted still, Belinda.
Thank you. Thanks, Brock. I just want to say thank you for being here again. It's always really interesting hearing your perspective and stuff. I was curious. So, what we're hearing in our community, it's been actually fairly not positive, but not negative. Our largest employer is continuing business as usual, looking ahead at capital expansions, etc. So that's all good news. I did speak to a business though in the agriculture sector yesterday, specifically in farm equipment. And that has probably been sounds like the most impacted business in our community from what I've been hearing. And one of the things they noted was last call, somebody had brought up about the remission request process to get some of their tariffs back or tariff exemptions. And so I did raise that to the business, and they noted they are working through it, but it's very complicated and onerous. And I was curious if anyone else has had experience in talking to their businesses about this process, if they've heard of anything out there in terms of workshops or support that's already out there to help businesses through that process.
Has anybody heard about any supports in that area?
Linda, sorry, what area was it? Sorry.
They're in the agriculture sector. It's farm equipment. And so they've applied or trying to go through this remission request process to get tariff like exemptions and relief. But they said it's not a good or easy process. It's very confusing. And they were just wondering if anything was out there to help them through that process. I didn't know if anyone had heard anything from their businesses that are going through that, applying for that. And if anything existed already before I go diving into looking into that.
Janet, was that something you're familiar with at all, or?
So what was going to bring up is next week, and again, it's not like a pure like solution. It's more of like you're going to be in a space where a lot of agriculture and fisheries are going to be there, so you can ask them. So next week, as I am hosting a speaker series on tariff impact and how we can localize the Canadian supply chain, the sector that we're focusing on is agriculture and fisheries. And we're talking about interprovincial trade and its impact. We're talking about we're having a speaker from Grocer who's talking about their solutions on agriculture and growing local food. We're having someone from fisheries from BC to talk about that impact with Chinese tariffs, and if the next impact on US tariffs, it would really impact fisheries. But I'm also actively speaking to people in the agriculture sector in Guelph, in Ontario's perspective, to come to that session. So if they don't speak, they will come, because I'm searching for one more speaker to speak about agriculture specifically. So I'm talking to them today and next week. So if you're interested in coming to have that conversation and bring that important question up, if you still haven't heard answers, or if you want more answers, just come to the conversation. We have a round table at the end, the last 30 minutes, and it's just an opportunity for people to share, just like what you're doing right now, Belinda, about these are the issues of not having enough support, or needing more support, or not even understanding the process of how to even get the money, if it even exists. So I will send that link out there, but it's just a good conversation to have specifically on the agriculture sector.
Thanks, Janet.
Excellent. Chris Watson just asked if there was a link you could put in the chat, Janet, around registration. I don't see any hands specifically, Belinda, around the remission process itself. So yeah, I think Janet's suggestion of kind of find some events. I just posted a link in the chat as well to the kind of the formal webpage for the tariff remission requests. It looks like it's Department of Finance at the federal level. So I don't know. I mean, I hate to give homework here, Stephanie and Laura, but I don't know whether maybe that's something where we could reach out to Department of Finance and see if they are running workshops, or if they have advisors that can help with this. And then maybe that could be, sent out in one of the next EDCO newsletters or mailings or something like that to kind of let people know that the supports might be available there.
I already have it on my list of things to do.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Yeah, sorry, and I just saw that. Thanks for bringing that up, Belinda. I didn't realize that was something that was available. So thanks for that. And it looks like it's federal, as Brock posted. It also looks like it's fairly new. So unfortunately, the first people through are usually it's a tough process, right?
The guinea pigs. Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's really not, right? There's really not a firm process outlined.
And Nick, you're with the Ministry of Rural Affairs. Is this something you are hearing from others in that space, as I think about sort of farm equipment generally, or?
Yeah, no, I haven't personally heard of that. I do know a few friends who are involved in that, so I've asked them, because that would be the obvious to me, that a lot of that iron and stuff would have a challenge, and I heard, maybe third hand that certainly sales are down, I think, in farm equipment. So but yeah, it could be seasonal as well, but yeah, people could just be cautious at this point.
Just maybe to add to the context for folks, if you do have ag equipment dealers in your community, I have asked in Wellington County, where we're in, for people to reach out to those folks if they haven't already, to get a sense, because in our case, this business sells grain storage bins, and they're been tariffed at 25%. And their second highest selling product is lawn tractors, and they've had all their orders canceled. They've paid deposits to their suppliers, and then now customers are canceling their orders. And people, it's hard to find another alternative. So in Canada, for those suppliers, and people not wanting to switch, or they're just kind of waiting, not buying to see if these things will change before they go out there and take those risks. So just to give you some context, if you do have ag equipment dealers, you might want to be talking to those folks.
Excellent. Thank you, Belinda. I see Gord's hand, but before we go to Gord, I just want to, Heather Lalonde put a comment in the chat around dealing with some similar things. Heather, can you share just a little information about what you've been hearing from the companies in your community, just so we continue to wrap our heads around what might be an emerging issue here?
Sure, I'm happy to. And Brock, I've been on a couple of webinars with you over the past couple of weeks, and actually had some of our politicians join in with the Middlesex County one, and they were very appreciative for all the information you provided with regards to the context of the tariff. So thank you for that. Helps all of us when our elected officials can also have that understanding rather than coming to us and, not having that background. In particular, we have one company here in Strathroy Caradoc, a new company, unfortunately, a large manufacturer, who has been able to source all of their product outside of the US except for one key chemical, which is a huge part of their process, and spend like $20 million a year on this chemical. And it's going to be subject to a tariff after this. They're on pause right now, but they are looking at ways to try to get some of those exemptions done. So Belinda, thank you for bringing that up. If there's some way that we can create either a document or a webinar or something for manufacturers to try to maneuver these. Our companies we have some multinationals, but some of them are homegrown. So this is really a challenge for them trying to navigate the paperwork.
Excellent, thank you, Heather. Appreciate that. I think for some of us, this is a new bump in the road. So the more information we have, the better. That's really helpful. Gord, I promised I would go to you next. You've been waiting patiently there.
So thank you, Brock. This is not direct for manufacturing, may lead to manufacturing, more of a medium to long-term payoff, but I feel passionately we should jump on this like now. And that is like the Americans are laying off thousands, tens of thousands of scientists and health researchers and all that. And I just wonder, is EDCO pursuing this at all? Like, I think government, and the government's going to say, oh, it's provincial. Well, okay, get the provinces on board. Get either governments directly, businesses, universities, higher levels to poach these people. Like I just saw a thing this morning, 40% of Americans are at least in their head saying, I should move to Canada. And I saw the government of Germany has set up a new ministry called Research, Technology, and Aerospace. And it says the stated goal is to woo scientists from abroad. So I'm kind of thinking like post-World War II, where fall of the Nazis, what did the smart Americans do at that time? They got Werner von Braun and all that. They got a space program out of it. And I really think that this would really revitalize our economy in the long run, reverse that brain drain, get Canadians in the US to come back home, and get unhappy, freedom-loving Americans to come back and come to Canada and provide that impetus, like we keep talking about, growing the pie and not just redistributing it. And I think this would help. So just wondered what you thought.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And Kathy has just posted a link to a recent news story in the chat about just this issue. I actually, I'll maybe throw this out there for folks to respond to, but as people are thinking about connections to this, I asked the president of the University of Waterloo about this a couple of weeks ago, Vivek Goel, and he saw the opportunity, but said the challenge that we have in Ontario right now, in Canada right now, was the kind of the financial crisis that colleges and universities are in. So the places that would recruit these folks are in a bad spot. So for the University of Waterloo, he suggested, for example, there's a $75 million a year operating deficit, so it's hard to recruit more talent. But I think you're right, Gord. I think there's something here, and I don't know whether there needs to be some sort of provincial program to kind of make funds available to target some of these researchers, or something federal like the Canada 150 program a couple of years ago. But there's a huge opportunity there. And I think it spins into other areas. Somebody mentioned the other day that the measles research unit at the National Institutes of Health in the US was essentially being closed down by RFK Jr. And that's an $8 million a year operation. And for $8 million, Canada could buy the best measles research unit in the world and just transplant it right here, right? And that $8 million is a pretty minimal expense to have that kind of global expertise. So I think there's something there. Has anybody else been sort of seeing aspects of this or thinking about parts of this? I think Gord's raised a really interesting issue here.
I'll jump in and just make note. I put it in the chat, but Alyssa Sklar actually did a white paper on this exact topic. And in Canada, we really benefited from Trump's first term in office because we did recruit a number of medical professionals into our system and into the research areas. So I've included that link here, but it's also on our trade and tariff page.
Right. Other thoughts on this kind of wealth of expertise that might be available to us?
I think the other area is just in healthcare. It seems like I read something about BC really trying to woo U.S. doctors and nurses to address shortages there. And I think, speaking locally, that's our number one shortage right now is, RNs, RPNs, PSWs, and certainly other healthcare professionals to support that shortfall. So I don't know. I think that's another huge opportunity at this point as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. I think something that we need to start paying closer attention to. Belinda, I see a hand up. Is that just from before, or did you want to kind of weigh in on this as well?
No, I'm good. I must have just not put it down. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. That's the easy way to get volunteered to say something when I'm searching for people to speak.
I just wanted to mention it's Kathy Ireland from Spark Center. We're one of the regional innovation centers in Oshawa. CBC had, I forget who they interviewed, but definitely on this topic, and that Toronto academics were looking to figure out a recruit plan for these US researchers. So maybe take reference to CBC and find out who they interviewed. That might provide some insight.
Christina Liu, I see a question in the chat. Do you want to unmute and pose that? Or I'm forcing people to join the conversation, but an interesting question about tourism. Do you want to share that with us?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very insightful, and I do feel more hopeful now, so that's good. So the question is, do you know if there have been any announcements made about additional tourism grants from the Fed government to essentially support the development of new tourism products to kind of capitalize on the trend of staying local?
Has anybody heard anything on that front? So it doesn't sound like it yet, and I think part of this may be that because we've just had a provincial election, we're just in the midst of a federal election, that some of this may be a little slow in coming down the pipeline. There were some programs announced, and I'm not going to remember the name. I know we have some folks from MedCat on the call. Maybe they can help me out. But there was a couple of support programs for Ontario businesses announced over the last week or 10 days. One of which was grants, matching grants for marketing into new markets for companies that had at least 5 employees. And so I suspect that many tourism businesses would qualify for those particular programs. Is there anybody who's got more insight into that set of programs than I might? Diana, see, I knew if I mentioned MedCat often enough, you'd have to speak up. So
someone will bite on our end. I'm not sure if this is the program that you're referring to, but yesterday, this program called the Ontario Together Trade Fund was recently announced. And it's essentially to help businesses pivot towards more interprovincial trade, to help them diversify where, like, kind of diversify, like, from American suppliers, customers, things like that. I wasn't super involved, or I wasn't involved at all in the development, which is why my description of it is like still pretty high level. But I think that was one of the things that was released yesterday, shortly after the speech from the throne. And I know also during COVID, there used to be like an Ontario kind of like a staycation like tax credit, I believe, which I think was wound down after COVID. But yeah, the question also just made me think of that as well.
Perfect. And so I've just posted the link. That was the program I was thinking of. I was sort of looking through it yesterday when the announcement came out. Um, Bit of a stretch on the tourism side, but not impossible. And so I think that might be worth taking a look at. But I see that as you were talking, your colleague Matthew raised his hand. So I'm going to put Matthew on the hot seat and say, Matthew, maybe you can comment on this, but maybe share other thoughts or ideas about what's coming out of the ministry or the minister's office at the moment that we should be aware of.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. And Van, I think you did a good job kind of explaining exactly what the program is. You're right. It's not directly related to tourism, but we're pretty happy about the Ontario Together Trade Fund. There's some pretty good supports in there that we think will, provide some immediate relief for businesses and also try to diversify sort of our angle that we're looking at when it comes to trade and moving away from the U.S. So there's a few kind of for anyone who's interested, I'll kind of give just a little bit of a rundown as to what the project actually entails to be eligible for this fund. So we're looking for companies that are making investments to enhance domestic competitiveness, build capacity in local supply chains in Ontario, pivot your operations to manufacture fewer trade exposed goods, or other activities required to diversify your revenue streams, such as reshoring. So there's kind of a few different slots here that we look at when assessing these applications, and then a few things like the kind of amount that you're investing in the project that can be considered eligible cost, and how long you've been in business, and all the kind of typical guideline things that we take a look at. But we're really hoping that this will be something that we can use alongside other programs like the Advanced Manufacturing and Innovation Competitiveness Stream and regional development programs as just kind of additional boosts for this, and hopefully get some interest from companies that are really interested in building up their own domestic capacity and potentially improving our competitiveness here. And I think at the same time, like, I don't want to overshare and take up too much of this time, but I'm happy to answer any questions too that people have on our recent interprovincial trade announcements, whether that's the MOUs signed with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, or just on that kind of Bill 1 protecting Ontario through the name is always too long, Protecting Ontario Through Free Trade in Canada Act, or whatever the exact acronym is. I always forget. Happy to answer any questions on that as well.
Maybe Matthew, I'll put you on the spot to share a little bit on that. Your colleague Sarah has just posted a link to the Protect Ontario Through Free Trade with Canada Act, a link in the chat there. But maybe you can give us the kind of the 90-second overview of what the act is meant to do and what some of the implications might be for our communities.
Yeah, so just kind of ignoring my scripted key messages here. We're doing this because I think all provinces and the federal government have come together to realize that this is a pretty crucial time to enhance and improve domestic competitiveness, break down interprovincial trade barriers, and make it easier to do business in the country. So our bill, we wanted to go a little bit, take a bit of a step further than some of the other provinces and really lead the way and hopefully kind of be the first. Obviously Prince Edward Island recently came out with their legislation and Nova Scotia as well. We wanted to sort of set a little bit of a higher standard and be the first domino to fall when it comes to taking a really aggressive approach to removing our exemptions that are in the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, so our party-specific exemptions, or exceptions rather, and move on some other things. So the first thing that we did is remove all 23 of our party-specific exceptions. So just a quick explanation on this. A lot of people have been calling me in the last 2 days asking if this means that we no longer have any market protections for these market segments, things like energy, supply management, even travel agents that need to have a physical place of business in Ontario. It doesn't mean that. Nothing is actually changing right now when it comes to the legal discriminatory protections we have for Ontario businesses. It just means that if there were to be a trade dispute, come into question from another province or whatnot, we could no longer use those exceptions as a defense and would have to resort to something else within the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, such as a general exemption or a legitimate objective to protect Indigenous groups, for example. But the hope is by removing some of those kind of protections that other provinces will do the same, and eventually we'll kind of get to a framework where we don't need to use those exceptions anymore and there is movement on actual free trade. Second thing is labor mobility, so expanding the as of right rules that allow people to, if they have a regulation or a certification from another province, can come in here using that, work for 6 months while they're being certified with our regulators here. So we want to expand that to all sectors. The other thing is direct-to-consumer alcohol sales. So we will be undertaking this, building the framework, I guess, to allow consumers in Ontario to purchase alcohol directly from other provinces. So you can get BC wine, Nova Scotia craft beer. Well, BC wine once we sign that agreement with them, and then Nova Scotia craft beer. So few caveats. The PSE removal is unilateral, so we are doing this just on our own. There's no agreement that needs to be signed for that. The others, labor mobility and mutual recognition of goods and services, will fall under memorandums of understanding with other provinces. So throughout the summer, our regulators and stakeholders are going to be getting together to kind of put together a negative list of items that will fall under the mutual recognition kind of scope. So we want to recognize everything, but we'll be doing some consultations in the summer to kind of figure that all out, and then hopefully, treat all the economies in Canada as one.
Excellent. Thank you, Matthew. And kudos to your colleagues at the ministry and to the minister for this kind of mutual recognition approach. This is something that the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has been pushing very strong. And the kind of the general notion was, if you have 400,000 interprovincial trade barriers, you can't go out and change each of them individually. And so a great starting point is to sort of say, well, we'll just recognize everybody else's regulations and requirements and sort of say, well, BC, you know what you're doing. We'll recognize your standards alongside ours. And it becomes this quick, I don't want to say easy or painless, but it becomes a much quicker way to kind of address this. And so it's great to see that the province has moved in that direction.
100%. It's, there's 13 economies right now in Canada, and we want to make it into one. And I think, it's really nice, even on the calls that we have with all the different provincial leaders and federal leaders, regardless of party lines. It's very nice to hear everyone really kind of saying that they trust each other and trust that they're not going to put their own people at risk with anything. And therefore, why shouldn't we trust them as well? So it's actually been a pretty good kind of unifying exercise, I think, for our leaders.
Excellent, Matthew. Thank you. I really appreciate this input and insight into what's going on, and we hope that you and your colleagues continue to be a part of these discussions as we do this every couple of weeks. Let me go to Anne, who we haven't heard from yet, and then I'll come back to Janet in a moment. But Anne, what's on your mind?
Well, thank you, Brock, for continuing to do these. I always enjoy and love them at the EDCO conference, so thank you. But my question's for Matthew in regards to, you had made mention of the interprovincial trade barriers. In reviewing of this, is there discussion regarding LCBO and the trade barriers with our craft distillers, brewers, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a good question. And unfortunately, I can't speak to the specifics behind that. Folks in the Ministry of Finance will have a better idea on the LCBO and that specific sense. We don't expect the direct-to-consumer alcohol sales will impact the LCBO in that sense. We are intending on that project, I should say project, but that change being specific to the consumer. So you as an individual can buy for personal consumption alcohol from other provinces. That doesn't mean that Circle K can do that, or that there's going to be some other opening of that stream. The also kind of any sort of party specific exception that would relate to alcohol sales that's removed from our kind of list within the CFTA. We don't believe that will cause any risk to the LCBO or their operations. It's more of just we'd have to kind of, if some other province said that we were discriminating against the treatment of their alcohol or content labeling on things here, then we would kind of be able to resort to the general exemptions within that agreement as a defense. But there's at this time no expectation that the LCBO anything's going to be kind of impacting that.
So I guess my question is more in regards to the impact the LCBO has on our craft industry. Yeah. And the barriers that they face. So within Ontario itself, is that, so currently they have to go through the LCBO, but if we're inviting others in, is that then going to change our own perspective on how we handle and treat our current craft distillers, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a good point. As of right now, so it's hard to say because the direct-to-consumer framework, like it's not necessarily that others will be coming in per se to operate. It's just that people can order kind of online from other provinces. But I don't want to give you a wrong answer, so I can connect with you, Anne, after, because you're not the first person to ask about all the it's everything from alcohol to eggs to milk to energy that I've been trying to figure out. So I'm happy to connect with you later and probably give you a better answer on that, because I think I should probably know that for my own use as well.
That's great. We're just doing a wholesale food trade show, and this comes up all the time in the way of our startups. It's an expensive journey through the LCBO for them, and the profit sharing makes it not, or the profit loss sharing with the LCBO makes it a loss for some of our craft industry. So, I think even within, not to say we don't want interprovincial, but inter-Ontario removal of barriers would be great to see as well.
Yeah, absolutely understand.
Thanks.
Thanks for raising that, Anne, and Matthew, thanks for being willing to kind of chase that down after the event. Let me go to Janet, and then Laura, you're on deck for next. But Janet, what's on your mind now?
Thanks, Brock. Matthew, it's just such a joy. You're so informational every single time you just speak. So thank you for doing that. So I am curious about just barriers with, if you heard anything about agriculture and fisheries. So right now, what we're having next week is someone who is actively crying out, fisheries are going to be heavily impacted because they're hit by China. They're hit by US soon, and they're just planning for that. But yeah, they make it, US and China make up like 80% of, like, she's in the crab specifically, and she's like, that's 80% of our market gone. And right now with these trade barriers, there's trucking issues between like BC and Alberta. I'm not sure about Ontario. And there's many little barriers that prevent a good from being profitable to be even sold across Canada in any way. So yeah, just curious about if there's any way to like free that up in Ontario. Do you see anything? I'm trying to get the BC Chamber of Commerce to also be in that call to just hear that this is what is going on in BC, and how can we just tweak these issues so it could have more of a free flow to just make the hit less, because her fear is it's not profitable for crabbers to get the crab. Why do I crab? And that just impacts like an entire sector of inventory gone if people don't want to fish, if people don't want to get crabs.
Yeah, good question. I don't really know much about the crab industry. Sorry, Janet, where are they specifically fishing, like, and getting the crab?
They're from BC, so I'm just curious about trade barriers in Ontario that impact this. I know that the BC and Alberta, they have trucking issues. So like, for example, you can only like certain truck sizes can only be driven in the day, and then Alberta, you can only do it during night, or either way. We're gonna classified interprovincial trade next week with Deloitte, but I just wanted your quick take on do you see any issues of free flow that you're trying to free up in Ontario to have more free flow of Canada-wide goods?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the mutual recognition initiatives that we're doing are probably going to be the more specific ones for those issues when it actually comes to the free flow of goods and services. So when it comes to trucking, in September and sort of more recently, there's been more signatories. So all provinces are now signed on. There is an ongoing mutual recognition pilot program for trucking specifically. That was launched in Canada. That means that all the provinces are kind of undertaking a review of all the different kind of barriers when it comes to things like rest stop distances and tire pressure. And Ontario allows, I think, truck beds that are like 60 feet 6 inches, whereas in other provinces it's only 52 feet. And there's all these different regulations. So you're 100% right. That's one that we're working on pretty diligently. And I know British Columbia as well is sort of within the CIT, so the Committee on Internal Trade. They are sort of partly chairing the mutual recognition portion of that. And we heard from them yesterday that they're making really good headway on kind of undertaking sort of action towards developing a negative list of the things that they want to look at actually enacting mutual recognition on. Ontario, we just decided to kind of do the nuclear option and just say that we're going to recognize everything as long as other provinces agree to also do that with us. So we're hoping, and I'm pretty certain that this will be the case eventually within the next year or so, is that eventually we'll end up having these kind of mutual recognition MOUs with other provinces. I can't think of one right now that's opposed to this. There might be a few things here and there, some kind of kinks to work out when it comes to specific market areas and products where there's some trouble actually recognizing those. But as of right now, Ontario is fully committed to adopting the regulatory and kind of standards when it comes to things like trucking. I will say we've also heard from the trucking sector. I think Stephanie was probably on that roundtable that we hosted with the minister last week. There are definitely some kind of different views on mutual recognition in the trucking sector. A lot of those folks also want us to kind of look at market harmonization. So that means kind of a singular standardization of rules rather than simply recognizing those in other provinces, because even that can get a bit convoluted because it's up to the industry itself to kind of figure out how to recognize these things. Once, even if there is a negative list, puts a bit of an onus on them. So I think that's probably something as well that provinces will look at, is standardizing some stuff more clearly. But that will eventually come. We'll see. But we're certainly committed to, continuing that progress.
Excellent. Thank you, Matthew. And I just briefly before we move on, so I was doing some work on just this issue with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture a couple of weeks ago, looking at the trucking side of things. And I think one thing to keep in mind, and then this could impact, the crab fishery as a classic example, is that some interprovincial trade barriers are regulatory or red tape in nature. Other interprovincial trade barriers are a feature of how the world works, right? So distance is one of the biggest interprovincial trade barriers we have in Canada. And it doesn't always make sense to ship things long distances, depending on the product or what's being shipped. And so I think, it's important that we kind of focus on those ones that are in this kind of regulatory space, but recognize that we may still face some of those constraints of geography that have always sort of been a characteristic of the Canadian economy as we sort of try to operate in this massive country. Anyway, Laura, you've been waiting very patiently to kind of bring up the next question or thought or information about what's happening in your community. So, what would you like to bring to the table with us?
Thanks. First, I just want to thank everybody for the feedback, because it's helpful knowing we can't talk to every sector and every business in our community. to hear this anecdotal information from other communities, because I'm making notes of who I should be calling after this call. But I just wanted to note that I do think that there is a really prime opportunity to ramp up red tape reduction, like across the province, across Canada. But I'm saying this while our friends at MedCat are on the call here. A long, standing barrier to development that might not be directly related to tariffs, but is certainly exacerbated by it, is municipal servicing for industrial land. So across Canada, I believe our industrial vacancy rate is around 1.9%, which means that we have very little serviced industrial land. But in my neck of the woods, which is Simcoe County or Central Ontario, we have lots of industrial land that's not serviced. And the biggest barrier being the municipal cost to service those lands. That's been exacerbated, of course, because of not only the tariff-related impacts on material and products, some of which can only be sourced in the U.S., but also because of legislative changes to how we collect DCs and how we can apply those DCs to industrial projects. So, for example, through recent conversations with the Site Selectors Guild, we heard from site selectors in Asia and Europe who said, we don't even put Canada on the list for our clients because there's so little service land. And I feel like Southern Ontario is prime to get that now if we can address the servicing thing. So I would love to see us look at some of those longstanding barriers that could have a really impactful change at this time. An example of which being like an immediate solution could even be opening up things like provincial and federal funding that's already available to include last mile municipal services, because things like municipal water, wastewater, and even power are often always excluded as an eligible cost within those projects. So I just wanted to note that and see if others, agree if that's a barrier that could be solved at this time.
It's a very practical kind of suggestion on things there, Laura. Thank you for that. I think that Tara Lynn has a hand, wants to comment on that perhaps, and you got some applause from Belinda as well. So, Tara Lynn.
Hi, so I'm the EDO for Huron East, which is Seaforth, Brussels, Van Aster area. And Laura, we have the same issue. So I have a couple, agri manufacturers that want to expand in our community, but we don't have serviced land. And we've tried to partner them with private individuals that own the land and want to sell the land to development. And they've worked with them, and the numbers just don't work out, right, to try and get this land available for development. So it's definitely something that's impacting our community as well. And like we're facing, the challenge of potentially losing these businesses because there's nowhere for them to expand here. So yeah, it's really, really important subject.
And you've struck a chord, Laura, in the chat. I see that Leidy, Carol, Heather, and Rhonda have all agreed and given thumbs up. So it's definitely something that's worth pursuing. Stephanie, this might be something to kind of put together a bit of a committee on, or schedule an event where we could kind of explore this in a little more detail. Might be interesting to kind of see this, as it's obviously resonating with the group.
Yeah, we actually have struck an advocacy committee because EDCO has been adverse to strong advocacy in the past, and we're putting a framework together. But I will definitely bring this forward, and when we're planning meetings like our Queen's Park event or a Parliament Hill event, we'll definitely have that on our list of topics to bring up.
Excellent. And Anne has just posted a link to a Brockville company that may be able to help in this space. I maybe just mention as an aside that I also work in the financing of large-scale projects at this stage, and would be happy to chat with anybody who's wrestling to figure out ways to do this. But there may be other resources out there as well. So great to kind of see some suggestions emerging there. I'm seeing that we've got about 2 minutes left. Is there anybody who feels like they haven't had the chance to bring a particular issue or question to the table this week that they really felt they needed to get some feedback on, or hear a little bit of input on? Chris?
I just had a quick question. It more deals with like smaller sort of niche manufacturers. We're just heard of something yesterday where I think a fairly small composite auto parts manufacturer. It's actually it's a boat company that kind of does this as a side gig, and it's just sort of creating auto parts for these old essentially old Toyotas. And he's just found out that he's just getting absolutely hammered with tariffs at the border. I think I haven't had a chance to speak to him yet, but my sense is that he's just been used to sort of shipping them across, not thinking a whole lot about it, and maybe getting dinged with a bit of local sales tax or something like that on the American side. But now it's just getting hammered. Now it's not big, but I'm more curious about the best path forward. I've heard one person saying just talk to a customs broker, but I'm just wondering about if there's any sort of advice available for them that I could connect them to, just to sort of get them started in terms of what it takes to get an auto part identified under CUSMA, or getting it classified as a non-auto part or something like that, to sort of at least get out of. It sounds like he's getting dinged with both the fentanyl tariffs and the auto tariffs. So anyways, just any sort of thoughts on somebody I could connect them with, or someone who could give me some advice there.
Does anybody have some help that they could point to for Chris?
I could speak quickly about this. So last session we had a customs broker talk about that, and you could send her an email and just ask her about, like, do you do this? What does a consultation look like? Because she broke down how it is so important to have a custom broker go through it properly, because if it's not done properly, it's going to cost you money when you do it wrong. So I can send you the YouTube video for you to just see how she gave an overview of customs as a whole and what it looks like, and what she digs into, and what they help with, and just simplifying what they do in terms of tariffs. If that's helpful for them to see, it's like, is this a custom broker's thing? It does look like it, but someone can give an advice, and you can also share that you're talking to me and I guided her through that conversation for her to speak at York University.
That would be great, Janet. Thanks so much for that.
Awesome. And there we see the practical effect of what happens in these sessions. So that's great to see the two of you making that connection. Matthew, sorry.
Yeah, Chris, I was just going to ask, it would be great if you could send me some more information on that. I'm just curious to learn a bit more about how they're getting dinged for auto parts in particular. I'm curious to look into that.
100%. Yeah, me too. I've got a call into him, so hoping to really break down and get a better sense of what's going on, and then Matt would be happy to connect with you afterwards on that.
For sure. And just to say, like, I can't think of any good recommendations, sort of like the one Janet sort of suggested, but the minister and I were in Washington last week, and we'll very likely be going back at certain points, and we are meeting and have met with various auto lobbyists in the US, USTR, Republicans in Congress, to talk specifically about auto parts. So like we're trying to do stuff on this front specifically. So if that's any help we can offer, we're trying. But if I'm curious to learn a bit more about that, because I've been kind of staying in touch with some of these Republican staffers who keep kind of sending me some trade updates that sort of mention what's going to be happening with the auto stuff. So I'm trying to see where things line up.
Stephanie, have I got time to take one more quick question here? I think that Shriram has a quick comment or question, and then I'll turn things back to you for a wrap up.
Thank you, Brock. This is just for you, Chris. So I think yesterday or day before yesterday, the Trade Commissioner Services came out with CUSMA compliant links, and they've also come up with a hotline where companies can call up and ask, because it could also be something with an HS code issue. It could be an HS code issue that the company is facing. So I can maybe forward you that email right after this. I don't have the link, but I have the email which I got from TCS, and that might help. Because one thing they mentioned, I got to hear from one of our MatchCat contacts, is during the webinars, TCS mentioned that a lot of auto part manufacturers still do business under MFN, the most favored nation, instead of using CUSMA certification. So that might help the business. Thank you, bro. Just wanted to add that.
Excellent. No, that's super practical, and maybe you can copy Stephanie on that email. It might be a link or a source that could be added to the toolkit that's available. So, thank you, everybody. This, the more we do this, the easier my role in this gets. So, thank you so much for great discussion and conversation. Lots of amazing ideas. Obviously, still some angst and concerns out there, and we're going to continue to live with that for a bit. But hopefully, everybody leaves feeling just a little more positive than when we came in an hour ago. Stephanie?
Yeah, thank you very much, Brock, and thank you for everyone who participated today. I think that these sessions just bring that opportunity to network and talk about these things and see how we can help each other. We do have another one scheduled for May 15th. That'll be the next one. So that's on our website. And again, the recording from this and the white paper will be up on our website under the resources. And please feel free to share any resources that you come across that you think would be great for your colleagues, because we will put those on the website as well. Laura has been very busy trying to stay on top of everything, but we always welcome more participation. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to you, Brock, and thank you to you, Matthew, for bringing an update from Minister Fedeli's office. We greatly appreciate it. And happy Easter, everyone. Enjoy the long weekend.